Well, ladies and gentlemen, how about this? We've got college football playoff bracketology because there are 12 teams. I'm going to go through this list. We're going to talk about the potential teams that can make it. Where are we looking at week one? I mean, I did do a full 12 team prediction, and honestly, it's looking really good after week one, but it is just week one. A lot of the teams won. The only teams that really got eliminated, I would say, I mean, you could argue Clemson. It is just one loss and it's out of conference, but Clemson looked like more of the same, as well as FSU would happen to FSU. FSU's done. I know a lot of people picked them to make the playoff. I did not, but I do know that at this point, 0-2, it's not pretty much not going to happen for them. But let's take a look. It is kind of funny. College basketball bracketology is a lot better, but it is still funny to see this. You can see right now the odds to make the playoff. So they have this: Ohio State sitting minus 650, Georgia also sitting minus 650, Notre Dame now minus 357. Pretty easy schedule for Notre Dame. The question's going to be, is 10-2 enough for them to make the playoff? I guess we'll have to see how good their resume is. Does Texas A&M finish the season 9-3, 8-4? That would be, a nice quality win. Could Texas A&M go 6-6, and maybe that's not a good win at all? It'll depend on a lot of factors. The other thing for Notre Dame, they're going to have kind of a built-in advantage because they don't play a conference championship game, so they get an extra bye week. So that's another thing to kind of wonder about where they'll be seated if they do make the playoff. And the question is, 10-2, is that enough? We know if they go 11-1, they're going to make it for sure. But with no conference championship game, will that be enough for Notre Dame to make it right now? Certainly with the easier schedule. I do believe they face, I think it is FSU. So their schedule just got a lot easier because FSU turns out they're not very good. Maybe FSU, they get a backup QB in, they catch lightning in a bottle. There's still a lot to be determined, but it doesn't look like they're going to be very good. Oregon already falls to fourth. I remember they were third on all of the best odds list in terms of just making the playoff outright because they had a bad game against Idaho. They fell to number 7th in terms of the AP poll. I thought that was a pretty drastic drop. I think we'll know more about Oregon when they face Boise State, but I would say these top 4 teams, not guaranteed to make it, but very likely, maybe outside of Notre Dame, we will see. You do have Texas at minus 250, so obviously a huge game for Texas against Michigan. Going to be a key non-conference win if they can get it on the road. Michigan, even if they lose to Texas and the offensive problems, they should still be at least a 9-3 team. That'd be good for like a top 20, top 15 ranking at the end of the year. That'd be a big non-conference win for Texas, and it would be great for their resume. So they're sitting minus 250 right now. I did not have Texas making the playoff, and maybe that was an oversight by me. I mean, we'll see. They did look good in week one. It was Colorado State, though, although they do look like they've got a really good offense with some solid receivers. Penn State sitting minus 200. Really good week one performance. I would say they're probably an 8, maybe a 9 type seed, although we'll see. Alabama sitting minus 145, so they're still kind of borderline right now, but they probably will make it. Although, I mean, it is a tough schedule. Ole Miss also sitting minus 145. You do have Miami at minus 110 just to make the playoff. They would be the highest in terms of odds. The only ACC team here. Pretty interesting there. And then Tennessee plus 160. Personally, I have Tennessee making the playoff. I predicted them in the preseason. Michigan plus 175. I don't think they'll make it. Missouri plus 200. I've seen a lot of people say right now Missouri probably looking at that final seed for the Power 4, so they'd be the 11 seed with the Group of 5 team taking up the 12 seed. You do also have Utah here. I did pick them. Clemson sitting still plus 225. It's a non-conference loss, so they still have no ACC losses, but it's going to be very hard. LSU after that loss. I wouldn't completely write them off, though. I really wouldn't. We'll have to see with LSU. It's funny, LSU sitting plus 250, USC's plus 300, even though USC beat LSU. But that's just because people project LSU to still be better than USC. Kansas State, Liberty is the number one Group of 5 team, huh? I really hope Liberty does not make it. They've got a ridiculously easy schedule. How about Louisville? Louisville's been a team that's trending up. Texas A&M, you could argue, maybe in the hunt on the outside. Oklahoma is another team you could argue. What kind of abbreviation is that for Memphis, man? I have Memphis as my Group of 5 pick to make the playoff. They won 40-0 against, I think, like North Alabama in week 1, an FCS team. They do face Florida State, not this week, but I think in a few weeks they face Florida State. So that'll be an interesting game. Iowa there. Kansas is another dark horse that I picked. Oklahoma State, kind of similar to Kansas, a Big 12 team. NC State did not play well in week 1. They've got a tough game in week 2 against Tennessee. Nebraska, they've got a relatively easy schedule. They've got a huge week 2 game against Colorado. Texas Tech looked horrible in week 1 against Abilene Christian. Auburn is getting some hype because they crushed Alabama A&M. Arizona, they just have no defense. SMU, yeah, SMU's 2-0 now. They've got a relatively easy schedule in the ACC. I could see SMU getting some hype depending on if they start maybe 6-1, 7-1. Texas State is another team I've seen a few people pick to make the playoff as the group of 5 team. Tulane, they've got a big game against Kansas State. Some of these teams, Miami of Ohio, possibly the best team in the MAC. They did lose week 1 to Northwestern. UNLV got a win in week 1, although I did not really like their offense. They barely threw. Virginia Tech, what a bad loss that was. They're basically, I would say at this point, no, you can't say they're done. I mean, listen, the ACC is not that great of a conference. Yes, it was a bad loss on the road, but Vandy's not a horrible team anymore. I will say that. So Virginia Tech, we'll see. But I could see that loss coming from a mile away. I had that game being very close. West Virginia is not going to do anything. Come on. South Florida faces Alabama this week. We'll see. It's not going to determine whether or not they make the playoff. It's their group of 5, but obviously if they could keep that game close, that would be big for them. Look at FSU plus 2,000. Troy has better odds of making the playoff now. But I'm not going to go through. Okay, my goodness, there's a lot of teams here. I'm not going to go through all these teams. But boy, I think they list every single team. They've got UMass there as well. So this is the bracketology, I guess, and the overall game lines they have. Let's go to this. Okay, so the teams receiving first-round buys. I don't think anyone would argue that Georgia right now is the SEC, favorite. If you're doing a bracketology, they've got to be the number 1 overall seed at this point. 1 week into the season, they crush Clemson. You're sitting 13.5-point favorites. You win by 31 points, 34-3. Ohio State, I think you still have to have as the Big Ten team, especially with how badly Oregon struggled, because it was like Ohio State, Oregon, Oregon, Ohio State. Well, we know Oregon struggled, and so Ohio State, even though maybe in the first half wasn't a great performance against Akron, I would certainly have them as the number 2 team. Miami has to be the number 3 overall team at this point. I mean, look at how bad the ACC's been. You've got Clemson knocked down a bunch of ranks. You've got FSU now 0-2. Maybe Louisville creeps up there a little bit. But you can see Miami sitting as the number 3 overall team right now, getting that first round bye. I did have Miami. These were my exact, wait, did I have, I think these were my exact top 3. It was Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, and then I had Kansas instead of Utah, but here they have Utah. I did have Utah making the playoff as the number 10 overall seed, but in this scenario, Utah, they get the win against Southern Utah 41-0. Now they get Baylor. That's another game they should win at home. They're like 15-point favorites. I think, the Big 12 is such a mosh pit. You got to throw someone in there. Utah was the preseason team. They've done nothing to really ruin that. They have Liberty as the number 12 team, so the group of 5 team. I really hope it's not Liberty. And if I was doing a bracketology, I would probably have at this point Boise State, or probably I would have Memphis actually, but I could see Boise State, the hype that they're getting. Ashon Genty, the superstar running back, 6 touchdowns. It'll be interesting to see how they play against Oregon, but they do have Liberty, who beat Campbell in week 1. Liberty, the easiest schedule in all of college football, at least in terms of the FBS level. Oregon, they still have as the number 5 seed. I think you could potentially bump Oregon down a few spots if you're being aggressive with a bracketology based on how badly they performed in week 1, but I can understand keeping them at number 5 otherwise. Don't overreact. It was you're facing Idaho. Dylan Gabriel still had a really good game. We'll see how they do against Boise State. I think they're going to bounce back. They have Michigan as the number 11 overall seed. I would disagree with that. I don't think Michigan's making the playoff. I would have a bevy of teams over Michigan, but they have Michigan taking on Notre Dame. Certainly at this point, it looks like Notre Dame is on the trajectory to make the playoff. Not exactly sure where they'll be seated. It'll be interesting if they go 11-1. Will they get that number 5 seed to where they get to face the group of 5 team at home? We will see. You do have Ole Miss. Certainly they destroyed Furman. If you think they're a top 10 team with what they did week 1, Jackson Dart. I mean, you're facing an FCS team, but they're obviously going to be in the playoff at this point. And you do have Texas as the number 7 overall seed. Yeah, I mean, Texas is like a top 5 team right now. And it's going to be a big game against Michigan, but right now they definitely would make the playoff. Alabama, they're another team that I did pick to make the playoff just because I think they've got a really unbelievably talented roster. Jalen Milroe, the returning dual threat QB. They destroy Western Kentucky. They were 31-point favorites. They win by 63. It's impressive. although it is Western Kentucky, so we'll see. And then Penn State is another team that had a nice performance in week 1. You can see there are several bubble teams they've got here. They have USC on the bubble now. Yeah, I don't know about USC being a bubble team necessarily. Well, I mean, I guess if they're, like, in terms of the AP poll, inside the top 15, they're right on the border. I think Missouri would be a bubble team. I mean, if you're not going to have them make the playoff at this point, they would be a bubble team. But, you know, USC, I think it's going to be hard. I think they're probably going to lose 3 games and miss the playoff. They do have a very talented roster, though. That USC roster is loaded, especially with offensive firepower. Boise State on the bubble, yeah, they could be a group of 5 team. I would say Memphis as well would be right up in there if you're going to have Liberty as the one making the playoff. Those would be teams as top contenders. And you do have Oklahoma State. That's a very nice win over South Dakota State, the FCS national champion. But again, with the Big 12, it's such a mosh pit, they could very easily lose 3 or 4 games and be far out of the playoff. You do have some teams that could be overvalued. Michigan and Clemson. Well, I think people don't really like Clemson anymore. Michigan, they have a good, talented defense, but I agree. Michigan is a team that I don't think is going to make the playoff with the QB room. The biggest games this coming week, Texas at Michigan. Yeah, so if Michigan loses, they're still going to be perfectly fine in terms of being in the hunt to make the playoff. But it is going to be tough because they're going to be on the road at Ohio State. That's very likely another loss, so that'll be 2 losses for them. And then they also do have USC as well, along with, I think, another tough game. So the losses could build up, and if Michigan loses, they go 9-3. I don't think they make the playoff unless they just have a crazy resume at that point. Tennessee versus NC State. I think NC State's going to lose this game, and this is really going to catapult Tennessee to possibly being a fringe playoff team if they're able to beat NC State, although NC State had a really bad performance against Western Carolina, so I'm not sure about the hype surrounding Tennessee, even if they're able to blow out NC State, because people will just talk about the fact that NC State struggled against an FCS team. Appalachian State at Clemson. Yeah, I mean, I guess if Appalachian State wins this game, you can kind of put them in the hunt for being a group of 5 contender, because that's a huge win at Clemson. If Clemson loses this game, they're done. I think Clemson's done already anyways. And then Boise State at Oregon. This is another game. I think Boise State just needs to have a good showing. If they can keep it a touchdown game, that's going to be huge for their resume. I mean, obviously, they're going to have to win a bunch of games, you know, in the Mountain West and to be able to make the playoff in general, but still, that's a very hard game for them. That game's on Peacock, sadly. But yeah, so this is kind of what the current situation looks like. I would agree with the top 4 overall seeds if you're just basing it off of favorites. These are the 4 current favorites. It's Georgia, it's Ohio State, it's Miami, and then it's Utah. I would disagree with some of these. I would not have Liberty in. I would not have Michigan get in either. And, I mean, all these other ones, you can definitely, it's very, you know, like Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama, Penn State. It seems kind of obvious those teams right now, they would consensus be in. But me personally, like, I think Michigan will lose multiple games. They'll be out of it. I think Liberty, as long as they lose a game, they'll be out of it. And, you know, I think right now Memphis is going to be the team from the group of 5. You're going to see a team like Kansas potentially win the Big 12. I still think Utah's going to make the playoff as a lower seed, like a 10 seed, possibly with 2 losses or a loss. I think Notre Dame makes it. I think Oregon makes it. I think Alabama makes it. I think Penn State makes it. And I do also have Tennessee as a team that's a dark horse that I have making the playoff as well. And then they do also have, it looks like, lines, although I'm not really sure I understand. Oh, this is just the computer composite lines. So it looks like Alabama would be 2.2 favorites over Penn State in simulators. And you can kind of see how they have Georgia. Yeah, that's just because week 1, Georgia crushed Clemson. Ohio State struggled in the first half against Akron. That's why Georgia would be 8-point favorites at this point. But you can just see those overall matchups. Ohio State facing Texas in the second round. That'd be a fun game. Miami taking on Notre Dame. Notre Dame facing Michigan. So Michigan traveling to South Bend. That would be awesome to see that. Georgia facing Alabama. That would be kind of annoying to see an SEC matchup that, you know, you kind of want to avoid those, but you're probably not going to at this point. Utah, Oregon, a rematch of the Pac-12. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.